Morning, Europe. Good afternoon and good evening, Asia, and good night, America. I have the pleasure and honor to be talking to Lisa Rabinowitz, a colleague of mine. Thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Francesco. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
I would like to go through your bio, which would also be in the description of this video. Lisa Rabinowitz is a certified Gottman couples therapist and certified PACT graduate couples therapist specializing in couples where one or both partners have ADHD. Gottman and PACT both deeply inform Lisa's work with couples, guiding and supporting them to navigate the challenges of romantic relationships exacerbated by ADHD and stress. This is our first recording. We only had a brief chat a few weeks ago. Normally, when I speak with somebody for the first time, I feel naturally leaning towards having a more of a general chat, asking about each other's trends that we find in our work with couples. So maybe for the listeners, I would like to acknowledge that perhaps we won't be able to sort of go deep in any or most of what we discussed today. But maybe if there will be another chat, which I hope, we can go deeper in some of the topics that we would touch on today.
Sure. Thank you. Sure. Yeah. I'm interested in having this conversation with you. Thank you.
Lisa, do you feel in your work with couples, and perhaps if you compare and contrast that with your understanding of your childhood and the generations and societies at that point, or those of your parents, grandparents, or history books, do you find that the couples that we are working with, whether we want to call them Western or not, or modern, current couples are in some sort of a crisis?
Yes. Putting it short, very short and succinctly. You know what? I think in some ways, maybe it was slightly easier back 50 years ago, where the husband knew what his role was and the wife knew what her role was. And since I work with couples who are anywhere from 18, 19, 20 years old to actually 70 or even 80, and I can notice the differences and hear the differences as I talk with different couples, the different struggles and the different challenges that they have. And I can definitely see that I hate to say it, the older generation, whatever, more than 50 years ago, things were more clear of what they were going to do. The wife was going to, for the most part, and certainly not all, and many women did work, but there was a good majority where you were going to stay at home and you were going to raise the kids. And then maybe at a certain age when they went to school or something, they, might go and work again. But nowadays it's just, the more modern society, I remember many of my couples telling me, like, I was at maternity leave, second week, fourth week, and, work is calling me, and, I'm having business meetings and trying to take care of the baby. And sometimes dad is home and mom is back at work. And it's, I don't think you would really hear that 50, 60, 70 years ago, that dad was staying home and raising the child while mom was working, right? And certainly all the different kinds of couples that we have nowadays, that look very different than they did back then. And so we're trying to figure out who are we, what are we, how are we going to do this nowadays? And so there's nothing is defined. It's very much a open environment, which provides a lot of pros, but also some challenges to that openness. So I see a lot of challenges for our couples nowadays. Very much so.
Right. I hear you. I feel being really neutral about what a role of different genders
Yeah.
could or might be, what I'm hearing you commenting on is the uncertainty about where do I stand, what's my role exactly,
Right.
what's fair to expect from my spouse's role, what
Right.
exactly is their role. Where it gets really complicated and difficult and the couple come to us is when the benefit of the doubt is no longer given. So it's like perhaps the previous stage was what's fair to expect
Mhm.
from my partner, given that we both do a combination of household roles and out there in the workplace roles.
Right.
What's fair to expect, and so, eventually one may feel a conclusion that, oh, I feel let down. I feel
Yes.
they should be doing more of this, and they should be appreciating
Yes.
what I'm doing
Yeah. Yes.
more.
Yes. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting because you think with, you know, the modern society, there would not be, you know, the things would be more equitable and more fair. But I find in my couples, you know, if we're talking, let's say a heterosexual couple, that the women will have more of the burden of the childcare and the chores and the doctor's appointments and planning the weekends and planning the holidays, and which is so interesting because you'd think that that's not really how it would be anymore. That's, you know, didn't we get, you know, out of the 60s and 70s that's just not, you know, how we're going to run our lives anymore. But it's still on a, you know, day-to-day basis. We do still see that. And so one of the things I work with couples on is, how do we make this equitable? How do we make this fair? Now, if you decide to have the woman doing those things as a couple and you find that it's really fair, then fine. But a lot of times it's the expectation and it's not discussed. And then, like you said, when you have that expectation, we can have a lot of fights over what those expectations are, because I thought we agreed on something which we really never talked about. Or I just thought this is how you have a marriage, but we never talked about what that really means or looks like. And so I just try to have couples have these conversations rather than just thinking they know what, you know, we should, you know, it's like, well, how should we have this? What does this marriage look like? I don't know. You know, and they'll sometimes turn to me and be like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, I don't know. This is a discussion the two of you have to have, and I'm happy to help you have that conversation. But nowadays, it can look from one marriage to the next totally different. Right. And in some ways, that's very exciting, right? It's not cookie cutter that we know exactly what this marriage is going to look like anymore. Yeah. So it's an exciting time, I think, for couples. So.
Yeah, so you're saying that nothing should be taken for granted, everything should be discussed, starting
Yeah.
from our values, I guess.
Yes, it does start from values. It does start from values. And yes, I definitely think appreciation is very important and key in marriage. And that's one of the reasons we're having, I think, some difficulties in our generation.
And when we see these couples having this discussion with us, couples therapists, later than desirable, what gets very much in the way is that by then there is history, baggage, resentment of different degrees. So you're having that helpful conversation, but in the meantime, that resentment and some trust issues have arisen, perhaps as well. Not necessarily to do with infidelity, but
You know, it's interesting because Terry Real talks about resentment, and he says, you know, to his clients and couples, you know, can you just for right now take resentment and put it over here? Can you just put it over here? Because we need room, we need space to be able to have conversation. And how do we have it if, you know, there's resentment, right? You know, resentment goes like this, it blocks us. We can't have, how do we have a conversation as a couple if all we have is, you know, anger and, you know, and certainly not to dismiss it. There's a lot of, you know, hurt and pain from the past. But we do need to make some space. And, you know, a lot of times when they can make some space for the conversation, they'll realize in many of my couples that they've done the best they could. Whether it's I'm following what I thought marriage looked like because of what my family's, parents, my parental relationships, what I saw, right? How do we know how to have a relationship? We usually look at our parents.
Mm.
That wasn't always the most healthy, but we take that and we bring that into this relationship and we sometimes just replay it. I say, you know what, you've done the best you could. Let's bring some benefit of the doubt. Let's, give, have some compassion for ourselves. That we've done the best we could, but now it's an opportunity to really do something different. And people are, I think, are very hopeful that they don't have to just keep doing the same old, because we know that didn't work. So, now let's try something new.
So, given that you're mentioning Terry Real, who is a colleague, very esteemed colleague we both value, he talks about, I was referring to some history and baggage within that relationship. He's also talking about societal. That's another aspect, because there is history between you and me.
Right.
But there is also history of historical struggles between the genders.
Oh, yes.
And Terry Real talks about the pendulum having shifted. Does he refer of the patriarchy, feminism, for the lack of better words,
Yeah.
pendulum, a pendulum?
Sure. Yeah, so it's so important. I do want to talk more about the differences and what Gottman found in the differences between men and women, but
That might be a good idea. I
Do
think
you
that
want me
would
to
be
do that
better.
first, and then since we're talking
Okay.
about Terry Real, maybe would you rather me just talk a little bit about Terry Real and then bounce back to the gender
I think
role?
the gender makes sense.
Okay.
So shall we talk about gender, Gottman's method
Gottman.
view on gender?
Right. So what he did is he did 50 years, approximately 50 years of research with thousands and thousands of couples. And he started noticing the difference between men and women. And I have to tell you, there are so many differences. So I'm going to maybe note maybe 7, 8 of them, but there's a lot. And it's so important to understand because sometimes we take things personal and we think, oh, what's wrong with him or what's wrong with me and or what's wrong with her and or they. But when he did the research, he found very specific things. So let me give you some examples. So one, he found men were more easily flooded. Flooded in his terminology means emotionally dysregulated. And so his findings were that, if men become more dysregulated, right, that means they're more vulnerable to stress. They're going to have higher increased heart rates, higher adrenaline levels, right? And so that's going to lead to what he calls stonewalling, which basically in our terminology or most layman people will say, oh, he shut down. Oh, he withdrew, walked away, right? And that's what happens frequently when men are confronted with topics, with issues. And it's very hard for them to become more emotionally regulated. And it takes a longer time. It takes longer for them to recover when they get upset. And I think that's so important because sometimes, again, we think, what I'm over it. Like, why aren't you over it yet? Well, we need to know that it will take them longer to get over it. So that's number one. Number two, women are more prone to bring up relationship issues. And I want to say, don't quote me on this one, I think it's like 90% of the issues are raised by women. That's a lot. That's a lot. Whether it's exactly 90 or not, it's a lot. Women will bring up the issues, right? And so if I'm bringing up issues, that means it's going to sound like a complaint, probably, could even sound like a criticism, which is probably going to hurt the relationship. And then it's going to make it even harder for, the man to come and tackle the problem. It's like another issue, like, and my couples will say, like, when's the list over? It's just there's another one and there's another one and there's another one. But someone's got to bring up the issues.
Yes, and one of the undesirable consequences of that is that men sometimes panic and feel like, oh my God, that she really feels like this is hopeless. But that's not That's not actually, that's a misunderstanding of where she's coming from. And like you're saying, she's more prone to bring up the issues to such extent that very often I get women's asking men, but what's your point of view? What do you think are our issues? How can we improve these? They want to hear problems from him as well.
Yeah, they do.
It's almost like if they don't hear any problems, they get somewhat suspicious or concerned.
Yeah, they a lot of times they'll tell me, like, I don't think you're in the relationship. You're not committed because you're not bringing anything. You're not initiating anything, whether it's good or bad, actually.
Right.
And so they'll complain, like, he just doesn't talk to me. He won't talk to me. So it's the struggle that we have to understand, right? It's not that he wants to withdraw and that he doesn't want to talk, but we're just wired so differently. So interesting. Should I bring up a couple more?
Please.
Okay. So women feel they need to, excuse me, raise the emotional intensity to keep their partner responsive. And so you'll see women getting more and more upset, right? Because they don't feel like either the partner's engaged, they're not being met with the same intensity, like, don't you care? Because it's like, okay, fine, whatever, like, but if you cared, you would be as emotional as I am. But that's not how he feels, right? That's not what they found in the research, that's not how he's going to respond to the situation, right? And so sometimes it becomes this vicious cycle that she's getting more, elevated, and he's getting quieter and quieter and more withdrawn. And they just do it over and over and over again. So that's another one. Here's another one. I don't know what number we're on now. Women are actually more likely to bring up the past. Which again, if we're talking about, like, okay, she's going to complain more. Now she's going to bring up the past. Now, how often did women bring up the good things about the past? Not so often, right? What are they going to bring up about the past? It's going to be, you didn't do this, and you didn't do that, and you didn't do the other thing, just like you're not doing that thing right now. So this is, you can hear how this is going to get really challenging for a couple system. I on a different note, I'll switch over to housework, right? That is a typical one that women complain about, like, I'm doing more work than you. That goes back to a little bit earlier in our conversation. And Gottman found that when men did more housework, there was more intimacy in the relationship. It's very important for, I think, the men to realize. Men don't frequently realize that, but that was what they found in the research. So did you ever hear that?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, feeling helped, supported.
Exactly.
And also, indirectly, if you're contributing to housework, you're showing an appreciation for her housework, which she may otherwise feel went unnoticed and not appreciated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so all my couples were like, oh, I'm going home to do the chores. They should sort of joke with me. But let's see, I think there's a few other things. We'll talk about influence. And what I mean by influence is, if we're in a conversation and I'm trying to make my point, will my husband accept that point? Will my partner, the male partner, accept and be willing to negotiate, or just stake in the ground? I'm not having, this is the end, this is what I said, and that's the end of the story, right? So only about a third of American, most of this is on the American husbands, were able to accept influence by their wives, which created a big challenge. We need to be able to influence each other. Men who were able to accept influence, they also became more influential in the relationship. But if you're going to just put a stake in the ground, not have a conversation with me, it's my way or the highway, then we were going to have a lot of problems in this relationship. And that was another finding that they had between the differences in men and women, that just men weren't in more of the, are you from, I know I'm throwing out a lot of terms. I don't want to confuse your listeners. He had masters in disaster couples. That's what he termed them. The master couples were the successful couples and the happy couples, and the disaster couples were the unhappy couples or divorced couples. And he found in the disaster couples, men were my way or the highway, and the master couples, they were much more willing to be influenced, willing to have a conversation, willing to talk things out, try to figure things out, work it together, negotiate.
Yes, I feel. Say it again.
No, there's a big difference in the master and disaster couples. So.
Yes, it strikes me that there is sometimes fear gets in the way of men. I believe fearing that he will lose control, and engaging in this conversation means that she again is about. There's also a degree of trust and giving her the benefit of the doubt. You know, I can trust her. She's not trying to take over. I'm just having a conversation.
Right. Right. Which really brings us to really Terry Real now, because he noticed that men had all these fears, right? And the traditional man doesn't talk about fears, doesn't talk about worries, doesn't talk about emotions. And he's found that, well, there's a lot of really the men are really depressed. And he started really focusing on men's depression and looking at it as a defense against, you know, what am I going to do with all these feelings, right? What do I do with these emotions? Well, if we push them into the closet, right, you can just do that for so long, right? Because of course it's not manly to have feelings. And so they saw the defense of depression. They, you know, see depression showing up. And he started talking about this, saying like, look, we are defending with medication, self-medicating, alcohol, drugs, violence, acting out, withdrawing. We have to address this. We have to look at this. This is a problem for men and relationships. We're wondering why we're having so many difficulties. What is it, like 50+% of divorces, right? And so often, you know, the men are checked out and showing up with depression. And so he's come out in the last few years with as a huge voice of, we have to help men. We have to work with men. We have to help them understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how to do it differently. Like, we have to give them a voice. They haven't had a voice. And it's, I think it's extremely valuable, extremely valuable. You can't just keep throwing resentments in the closet. You just can't. It doesn't work. You can't bury them, which, you know, is what we do often, and men more commonly, right? Again, because the women are voicing things 90% of the time. What are men doing with all these feelings about they're not happy in the relationship? Throwing it in the closet, burying it down, right? Shove it down. So.
Fascinating. What comes up for me is that fear again. Potentially men worry also, not just based on feedback from her, but also on their observation of society, societal changes. Men can get quite nerdy about, and also can reach maybe fixed conclusions of where we're at historically and societally, and maybe can read more into what she's saying and assume that, okay, this is getting out of control. Perhaps she's being influenced by her peers or by feminist talks.
Oh, yeah.
Ideology, I suppose. Ideology can get in the way, and it's true that societal influences, are not unimportant, but I guess men can give them maybe sometimes more importance than it's desirable, and add an element of panic and fear.
Sure.
Rather than engage just with her feedback,
Right.
they would see whatever ideology she may have or he may have on top of that and amplify. And you were saying the shutting down is the typical response, is like all of a sudden in 5 seconds you're getting her feedback, and on top of that you're just catastrophizing.
Yes, so true. Yeah.
You're talking about depression. If there's already a sort of an underlying depression to start with,
Right.
then there you go. That explains why they may be more prone to shut down.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And you know what? I don't want to make light of really society. I mean, you know, I remember being on the, you know, baseball field with my son, right? And if you miss the ball, right? If you don't hit the ball right, there's messages, right? And if you trip and fall, don't get up and cry, you know, like there's pressure still, you know, from a young age to be a certain way. And as much as I think we, you know, think that we've, you know, we're so, you know, we be who you want to be, which, you know, yes, in some ways, and no, in some ways, because there's still pressures of being a certain way, whether we recognize it or not. I think there's, you know, we're still giving men and women, you know, other, you know, about looks and all sorts of things, appearance. And there's an impact on that we can't ignore that. And when women can, you know, are diagnosed with anxiety more, right? Right. And can, you know, express their feelings. Men are still told, you know, indirectly or directly to keep those feelings inside and not to express them. And so, you know, it comes out in depression. And we need to be able to talk about it and help men really, and that's a tremendous, I think, benefit to Terry Real's work is helping men get a voice and not letting them just, you know, hide behind alcohol and all these very, very destructive self-medicating practices, or even, you know, working, I gotta work, 60, 70 hours a week, right? It keeps you away from your home. It keeps you away from, the marriage. Not so productive. So, yeah.
I mostly work with couples, but I also worked with lots of groups over the years. And of course, one-to-one therapy, but also group therapy helps help them men having a voice. And I've never been particularly interested in men's group, but I know that a lot of men also benefit from that sort of a brotherly relating.
Yes.
When Terry Real talks about giving men a voice, does he mean in society, in therapy, or in the relationship?
Probably all of them. But since his work is primarily in the therapy room, it's really about in the relationship and in the therapy room that, his focus is, you've got to hear both parties, right? Because the woman will be probably louder, will be more vocal. You have to make sure everybody has a voice here, not just the woman. So.
Right. On that note, we specialize in talking therapy. It's a tricky one to allow a man to feel that he's equipped to engage equally on a talking type of therapy and feeling based. Because from the outset, like you're saying, a woman would talk about her feelings, and a therapy is obviously trained and feel very natural and at ease talking about their feelings. And then often you have this man who is the third party in this triad, feel, not that they often voice it, there's some sort of an alienation of self-consciousness. Oh, I'm not as good as expressing my feelings, and or there would be something that is not that might strike him as inadequate. So he may early on in the therapy process maybe shout, judge, and she may feel really negative because at that point they, a couple in the first sessions is in crisis, and they come to see you because of that. So to have a good start is very important in therapy, and to make a man who is aware of not being very expressive and very in touch with his emotions feel confident to use that talking way of therapy is one of the arts we need to master.
Very much. So do you want me to tell you a little bit about how I do that, or do you want to share? I'd love to hear how you do that.
No, I'd love to hear if you want to.
Sure. I think I go in two different directions. One is that just because the woman is so vocal, I don't know if that actually means she knows how to, if she's really so in touch with her feelings, and if she really knows how to express. So I would say they probably are both pretty inadequate for the most part, just in general, on identifying feelings and being able to vocalize those in ways that are going to help them feel connected, right? I can say all sorts of awful, mean things to you, but that's not going to really help us in the relationship, right? No. So how do we both talk to each other in ways that we're going to be able to hear each other and feel connected and feel like we're moving forward and working together? So I in PACT, which is one of my approaches, it's called leveling the playing field, in the sense that I want both of you to show up in ways that are going to be good for both of you. And most of the time, both are not always so great at that. And, criticism is, something she might come in with a lot. That's not going to be something that's really going to help us move forward here and really stay connected. And you're saying you want to be connected. You want to feel love and cared for and protected, but the ways that we're doing it doesn't work. Neither one of you have what you need to have that work. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, and I'm going to help you do that differently. And so both of them, I find, need it. So that's one way that I work. But the other way is that we actually act out a lot of the challenges that they have. So rather than, him being like, okay, well, I'm behind the game here because, I don't know how to identify. I can't identify my feelings so well. And I might not have all the words I need to express what I want to express. I actually throw them right into the situation. So let's make believe, it's a kitchen, we had the fight in the kitchen. So even though I'm on teletherapy, we will go to the kitchen and, I'll say, what happened? And she'll be like, I was washing the dishes. I said, great. Turn your back to him, wash the dishes. And then what do you do? And he says, oh, I walked into the kitchen. I say, great, walk into the kitchen. And they replay it, and they see the errors they make. They see the mistakes and the assumptions and the expectations and the anticipations of what just happened in that scene. And then we replay it, act two, replay it in a way that they would have still felt together and not gotten to the fight that they got into. So it really helps take some of that pressure off of him, that I might not be equipped to do this, because it's just working together in different ways. So it's very fun to do that and help them learn just from a daily interaction of how they could be together differently. And not just the old ways are the ways that replay the, childhood injuries, the hurts, the pains, the negative interactions they've had. So it's really great. So do you want me to ask you a question, or do you want to ask me another question? I know we're almost probably running out of time too, so I want to pay attention.
With Terry Real, do you feel like we've covered what we wanted to cover in terms of the pendulum?
Yeah, I think for right now, yeah, that's good.
So maybe we can end. We started with an acknowledgement that the Western couples, or the current day couples, are in some sort of a crisis. So what can save them? And does the nuclear family has any is the nuclear family or versus large families, is a return to large families, which may be blended families? When I say blended, perhaps there's a combination of failed marriages or non-monogamous relationships that make up this small community or large family, has that anything to do you think this is one of the remedies to save the Western couple, to support that nuclear family with some sense of a small community?
Right, right. What I'm always torn with this question, because I feel like I need to meet my couple where they are.
Mhm.
And so some couples are coming in and, you know, they aren't married, but they've been living together for 10 years. And some couples come in and this is their third marriage. And some couples come in and they have, you know, their aunts, uncles, mom, dad, you know, first marriage, and everybody, you know, within blocks of each other. So every family comes in so differently that I really just try to meet them where they're at and help them really come up with what is going to work for them, because what's going to work for this couple over here could be totally different than what is going to work for this couple over here. So I want to help them figure out and decide what's best for them. What do they need? And some of my couples are actually picking up and moving closer to their families because they want that support. And some of them are picking up and moving away from their families because they really feel like it's toxic and not so helpful. And I think for me, the bottom line is how do we have a couple, whatever that looks like, and again, it looks like a lot of different things nowadays, feel secure, feel safe, feel loved, feel like things are fair and it's good for both of them, and that we have each other's back. I describe it a lot of times like, you know, when you go to bed, now maybe not every family needs to lock their windows and doors, but I think everybody can sort of have that picture in their mind that you can sleep more easily if your doors and windows are locked, right? You feel like, you know, my home's safe, right? I feel safe, I can go to bed at night. So couples have to create some kind of security for their relationship. And what does that look like? And that's really what I want them to do, is discuss amongst themselves, what does that look like for the two of you? So you can have a happy and enduring relationship that you feel, you know, is successful. And we know if you're not happy in your relationship, you're going to have health impacts and all sorts of other kind of impact on your life, on your work, on your physical health, on your mental well-being. So, you know, knowing that, let's create the best relationship that you can have, whatever that might look like. That answers that question.
It greatly helps you to know where the couple is at, more than any understanding of the Western couple is at.
Right.